As you can see, this is a very big book. It's supposed to be a fantasy epic, so we will find out. Hi, my name is HOTDPod, the King of the Narrow Sea, episode 4, and a foreword. For at the forefront, foresight proves to forebode fortunes forming. Henceforth, foreshadowing is the word of the day. Say it with me now, foreshadowing. And let's get right into it with the intro. Alicent's thingy here again has changed. With the introduction of another bloodstream, this one representing her second born, being her daughter Helena Targaryen. Now with all the time jumps in this show, the intro also doubles as a sort of timeline for you. Given the additions of new bloodstreams here, you know certain people are born now, so you have a rough idea of what period it is. And we time jump in this episode as well. I think it's been like 2 years since the previous episode. The girl Ray Ray is on tour here at Storm's End, which I think is the first time we've been inside this castle from like Game of Thrones or House. Viserys has allowed her to go out and choose her own match. As you can see here, she has this assortment of lords and knights, but evidently these matches don't tickle her fancy and the whole proceedings are just boring to her. These two dudes here, a Blackwood and a Bracken, fight a duel over Rhaenyra, with a Blackwood winning, which I think is the opposite from what happens in the book. But I love to see a Blackwood here because House Blackwood is one of my personal favorite houses in Westeros, and to see the infamous Blackwood Bracken feud in full swing is just brilliant. And initially watching this, I thought this kid was Benjicott Blackwood, but he wouldn't even have been born at the time, so this must be his father Samwell. Benjicott, called Bloody Ben, goes on to become one of the standout heroes during the dance at like 15 years old. But as I said, Rhaenyra doesn't have a heart in it, so she calls off this tour early and heads back home to King's Landing. And as they head home, approaching King's Landing, we see Caraxes here fly over their ship, thus indicating Daemon's return from exile. And the court is abuzz as Daemon presents himself to the king. And it's a bit of a tense situation here. You see Daemon having been exiled, then going on to fight in a war his king didn't sanction, and returning to court with a crown on his head, being dubbed the King of the Narrow Sea. Well, you can see how one would interpret this the wrong way, as treason, for example. Much to everyone's relief, Daemon bends the knee and announces that there is only one true king. Duh. Him and Viserys embrace, the king thanking his brother for emerging victorious. Notice Corlys Velaryon isn't here though, and no doubt he's still insulted from like the constant stream of rejections he suffered from the king years ago. And here things seem a little bit happy and peaceful for a while. Rhaenyra and Alicent even seem to be like, friends again. They have a conversation here and Alicent seems a little bit envious of Rhaenyra's tour. Like, it must be nice, you just go out there and there's like scores of lords and lads coming through to vie for your favor. Giving you a little bit of insight into Alicent's psyche, as you will see later. Rhaenyra and Daemon here have a conversation, Rhaenyra wondering why Daemon has come back to court, like what his intentions are, and he challenges her about why she hasn't been married yet. Daemon mentions something here about how marriage is just a duty, and once that's done, you can do whatever you like, or something like that. This, of course, is the conversation which Rhaenyra will remember. Foreshadowing. In the small council, there is word that Corlys is planning on wedding his daughter Laena to the son of some Braavosi Sea Lord. See, this could be problematic if the Velaryons, one of the strongest houses with one of the most powerful navies in the realm, allied with the Sea Lords of Braavos. And here Otto suggests that they seek out their own marriage pact with the Velaryons, with Laenor and Rhaenyra. Here we are introduced to Alicent and Viserys' second child and daughter, Helena Targaryen, whose first theme noticeably is in front of a window. Foreshadowing, just done right. I can't give details, which I hate, but it's out of fear of spoilers, but just know that it's a very interesting introduction of this character. Rhaenyra is back in the Red Keep and Daemon has left her a map, showing her a route through the secret passages that lead outside the Red Keep. And these secret passages of the Red Keep are a reoccurring plot point in this universe. Varys made use of them in Game of Thrones and so did Tyrion, and they will be useful, of course, and more significant later on. Noticeably, there's a shitload of rats in the Red Keep too. Could we perhaps be in need of an exterminator, a rat catcher of sorts? Foreshadowing. But the streets of King's Landing are lit as Daemon shows Rhaenyra around a little bit, and in the sequence here we get possibly one of my favorite ever displays of foreshadowing in television. The writer's room and editor here linked up to do a mad thing. Now again, I can't get into it out of a fear of spoilers for you, but book readers will know why this is so brilliant. With Rhaenyra and the fortune teller witch woman here. Foreshadowing. done right. See, now Daemon here is playing his own game and doing it brilliantly. Of course, this escapade in part is to show Rhaenyra life outside of the court. First, with what the small folk think of the Targaryens, especially her as heir. This also shows us that there is indeed a divide in the realm on the matter of succession. And secondly, Daemon here showing her what carnal pleasures lie just beyond the walls of the Red Keep, and what she as a Targaryen is. Almost reminding her that as the blood of the dragon, she can do whatever she pleases. I mean, he's married and he still beds and consorts whoever he pleases. A point that for Rhaenyra comes up later. Foreshadowing. But beyond that, I think Daemon knows exactly what he's doing, taking Rhaenyra out in public. Here, Rhaenyra has a brush with Sir Howing Strong, which is very interesting. In Flea Bottom, everybody knows Daemon is actually dubbed the Lord of Flea Bottom by the small folk. So here, them not covering up or hiding their identities is a calculated move by Daemon. He knows that there's eyes about. He knows people talk, so perhaps just maybe he wants them to be seen. With all these eyes around, Daemon seduces Rhaenyra and then just leaves her hanging, oh hot and bothered. In doing so, I think he awakens something in her as well. This idea that sex can be used as just a pleasurable thing and nothing more. A stark contrast to what Alicent is going through here, which is brilliantly intercut by the way. Alicent, being the dutiful wife, doing things the proper way, still doesn't seem to be taking pleasure from this. And also gives you insight into Alicent's feelings towards Viserys, who by the way is even more cut up by the last time with all these lesions on his body. We see how much more his health has deteriorated, and he isn't looking great at all. Anyway, having been abandoned by Daemon, Rhaenyra heads back to the Red Keep. But as she leaves, she's seen by a spy, the equivalent of Varys' little birds from Game of Thrones. Rhaenyra now is still a bit gushy and she seduces Sir Criston Cole, who just visibly goes through a torrent of emotions. He is, after all, a knight of the King's Guard who has sworn an oath of chastity and to defend the King's honor. And poking the King's daughter is a direct violation of those vows, a death sentence. But he folds and he deflowers Rhaenyra. This action right here will prove to be one of the most important plot points leading up to the dance. See, in Fire and Blood, one of the accounts is written by Septon Eustace, who suggests that upon hearing that Rhaenyra was to be married to Laena Velaryon, Sir Criston Cole, who was infatuated by the princess, slipped into her bedroom and confessed his undying love for her, offering to abscond with her to Essos and make a life for themselves. Septon Eustace says that Rhaenyra rejected him, of course, saying that she was a Targaryen princess after all and not some commoner. And he was a sworn brother of the King's Guard, and that if he could forget those vows, he could surely forget his marriage vows as well. An oath breaker. However, the account by the court fool Mushroom states otherwise, stating that it was actually Rhaenyra who tried to seduce Sir Criston Cole and failed, stating that the rejected princess then went on to find solace in Sir Harwin Strong. And although the accounts differ, they do agree that no matter what happened between them, from that moment on, Sir Criston Cole and Rhaenyra's relationship became less than amicable. So it is interesting to see the choices that the showrunners are making and which events they are choosing to make canon. To see in the show that she does in fact sleep with Sir Criston Cole, which will make their falling out later even more dramatic however it happens, and surely with Sir Harwin Strong's involvement. But I digress, I beg your pardon. Now it gets interesting here as we see that spy who saw Rhaenyra leaving earlier on goes on to report to Sir Otto Hightower, and it's established that this spy works for someone called the White Worm. The White Worm in question is Mysaria, and I am especially excited to see Mysaria now start to play the role that she does in the books, a role as powerful as Varys in Game of Thrones. See, in the books, Mysaria isn't just one of Daemon's mistresses. They almost work hand in hand, aiding and abetting Daemon in all his schemes, almost like his own mistress of whispers. Here we see many years later in King's Landing how she's made a name for herself in Daemon's absence. We see her here telling Daemon how she is protecting him, flipping the script on his words about protecting her in episode 2. Which takes me back to my earlier point about Daemon having some kind of a master plan and playing at something, because the very spy who sees them, who works for Mysaria, goes on to snitch to Otto. Otto, of course, then goes on to snitch to Viserys, saying he has it on good account that Rhaenyra and Daemon are doing a little bump and grind. Viserys is vexed. He calls it lies and turns on Otto here, accusing him of having more cunning intentions by besmirching the name of the realm's delight Rhaenyra, his heir, accusing him of wanting to put his own grandson Aegon on the throne instead. He then tells them to get out. Get out! But you see, Alicent was spying on this conversation and hears everything, which she then takes and confronts Rhaenyra about. Ray says it's all cap, which technically is the truth because these accusations are about her sleeping with Daemon, and she did it. She slept with Sir Criston Cole. She tells Alicent that her and Daemon just had a wild night out before Daemon abandoned her for one of his whores, which Alicent believes in the end. But before that, you can see that Alicent is quite visibly upset by this whole thing. Alicent is almost a slave to duty. The scene with her and Viserys having sex shows that brilliantly. Duty is sacrifice almost. Rhaenyra has a duty, but to Alicent it seems she's neglecting that for her own selfish desires. Also, Alicent here is quite clearly disgusted by the Targaryen custom of, well, incest. The Hightowers, as we know, have their seat in Old Town. Old Town is the home to the Starry Sept, the largest sept in Westeros and also the seat of the High Septon. So the Hightowers are strong believers in the faith of the Seven, which considers incest an abomination. A fun tidbit here, Viserys' grandfather, the old King Jaehaerys, actually married his sister Alysanne Targaryen, which was quite a bit of a scandal. And he had to have something passed called the Doctrine of Exceptionalism. The doctrine said that while the faith of the Seven, born in Andalos of old and brought to Westeros by the Andals, decreed that incest was an abomination, the Targaryens themselves did not have their roots in Andalos, but in Valyria instead, which had very different laws and traditions. Additionally, that they, the Targaryens, were not like other men, as they rode dragons and were the only ones in the world since the Doom itself. The Targaryens would continue to wed brother to sister as their forefathers had always done, as the gods had made them. It was not for men to judge. And so Jaehaerys had this doctrine passed and exceptionalism was born, which turned a blind eye to the Targaryen incestuous practices. On the flip side, Daemon's confrontation isn't as pleasant as the king's guard bring him before the king. Viserys here accuses him of defiling Rhaenyra and tainting her virtue, asking which lord would possibly marry her now after the rumors. Daemon here counters with, well, give her to me, bringing to light Daemon's intentions, this game that he's been playing. He wants to marry Rhaenyra. This could be out of love or ambition or both. Viserys isn't having any of this and eventually banishes him from court again. And now Viserys and Rhaenyra have a one-on-one. Viserys shows Rhaenyra Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire, cleverly concealed in his dagger. The hidden message saying, "From my blood comes the prince who was promised, and his will be the Song of Ice and Fire." Foreshadowing, which Game of Thrones ruined, and thus reminding Rhaenyra of her responsibilities, those bigger than herself and her desires, those of prophecy and fate. He also tells her that he's taken her out of the streets by force, telling her that she is done trifling and will marry Corlys's son Laenor Velaryon. Rhaenyra says that she will do it if Viserys gets rid of that scheming hand, Otto Hightower, managing to fully turn Viserys against him, who then goes on and sacks Sir Otto Hightower from his position. Otto is stripped of his pin and his office as Hand of the King. And the very last thing we see is Grand Maester Maelor bring Rhaenyra some moon tea, stating that it's from the king himself. Moon tea, by the way, is Westerosi birth control. And of course, we don't see Rhaenyra take it. You guessed it, foreshadowing. But yeah, a lot and more happened in this episode. Rhaenyra and Sir Criston Cole, Rhaenyra and Daemon, Daemon and Viserys. So much foreshadowing as well. I love seeing how these events from the show continue to differ from my own discernment of Fire and Blood. So to rate this, I'm thinking a solid 9.5. Because man, when this show is done or when certain things happen later on, I feel like this will be one of those episodes that people come back to and be like, what? Did that mean, was that? So overall, just a very good episode. And yeah, we shall return for episode 5. Until then, peace.